most recent reform one, yes.
And that was the only way that I could have a Siddur with me while I was deployed over there.
Yeah, it's rather sad how restrictive they are for different religions.
Not just that, that many people complain about Israel and Jerusalem, that they say that they discriminate. And over there in Saudi Arabia, if you're not Muslim and you dare to go to Mecca, you can be stoned to death.
It's yeah.
Because they say they see that you have defiled their holy place.
Okay, I've got the that set up. Can I move this? Yes, I can. Sorry, everyone, just still getting used to all the different buttons and bells and whistles. And put that over there, and up like that. Gonna have to use all this things to go back to the other tab. Okay, and one more button, and that's mostly okay. Okay. Hey, Jose and Gina, you got it working. I don't think you can hear me yet. I can see that it's connecting to audio, but I see you, and that's good. Okay, so this is going to be just a little on the rush side. I have a program that is being hosted by the Federation at 7, where we are going to be doing a little bit more of what this class is about. So I highly recommend that you attend that as well. And actually, while I'm talking about it, let me grab the link for that for you. It's going to be a seminar with a panel discussion with rabbis from around the Orlando community about how Judaism handles some of the practical issues during this coronavirus outbreak. So you may want to be look at that, because we're going to talk about the Seder and Passover and all those things, as well as other issues that are cropping up. So let me just throw that onto the YouTube link as well. Too many things to keep track of. Follow. Just fix my typos. Okay, and now I just need to put everything back in place again. And that goes there. And that goes there. And we're underway. All right, so hopefully everyone is doing well. It is nice to see those of you who have the cameras on. It is nice to know the other people are here. And it is good to still be able to study together. As we talked about last week, there is a rather important holiday coming up very shortly. Today is Rosh Chodesh Nisan, the new month of Nisan, and that's not a car maker from Japan. That is the month of Pesach, the month of redemption. In the Torah itself, Nisan is called the first month. This is the beginning of the holiday cycle, and it's a biggie. That's why we're doing 2 sessions on it. So last week's class talked more about the Seder itself. This week, we're going to talk about more of the mitzvot. We're going to talk in particular about the whole concept of cleaning out the chametz for Pesach. You're not used to the term chametz, don't worry, I'm going to explain it in full detail. Everyone ready? Good, let's get down to work. Why are we celebrating Pesach? Well, we talked about this before, but I want to focus on a different part now. 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread, and on the 7th day there shall be a festival of the Lord. Throughout the 7 days unleavened bread shall be eaten. No leavened bread shall be found with you, and no leaven shall be found in all your territory. And you shall explain to your son on that day, It is because of what the Lord did for me when I went free from Egypt. And this shall serve as a sign on your hand and as a reminder on your forehead, in order that the teaching of the Lord may be in your mouth, that with a mighty hand the Lord freed you from Egypt. You shall keep this institution at its set time from year to year. Okay, so the important bits that we have here. We are eating unleavened bread, and that there is no leaven in our possession. Those are the two things we're going to be focusing on most tonight. But notice the explanation. Eating the unleavened bread, eating matzah, and getting rid of the leavened products, the chametz, these are not just things we do. These are meant to be spiritual, emotional, psychological, historical acts that remind us of God's deliverance of our people from Egypt. So as we throw our shoulder into preparing for Pesach, it shouldn't be done just mechanically. It should be done with that in mind, that this is all meant to give us this living reminder of what happened 3,000 years ago. Questions? Onward? Onward. So the Pesach mitzvot, we mentioned these last week, but let's look at them again. There are a few mitzvot associated. The Passover sacrifice, that's the Korban Pesach. We don't do that anymore because we don't have the altar of Jerusalem. The Passover ritual meal, the Seder, we talked about that last week. The eating of matzah and maror, we talked about the maror and matzah as where it fits into the Seder, but we have not talked about what actually is matzah. What is that unleavened bread? We're going to talk about that tonight. And in its obverse, we're also going to talk about what does it mean to remove the chametz. I should point out, because I don't think I mentioned it last week, when we say eating matzah for 7 days, it doesn't mean you have to eat matzah on each and every day of Pesach. The only obligatory eating of matzah is during the two starim, the two seders, on the first and second night. If you want to eat bread, it has to be matzah for the rest of the holiday. You're not allowed to break out the Wonder Bread, but you only need to eat that matzah on the first 2 nights. The other nights can be bread-free. So if you are sensitive to gluten or just don't exactly care for matzah, or matzah doesn't care for you, you only need to eat the matzah on the first 2 nights during the Seder, when we actually say the blessing of achilat matzah. We're good? Good. Oh, and roll. There we are. So chametz and matzah, as I just hinted, are both kinds of bread. Many people tend to act like matzah isn't bread. It is. It's just a particular variety of bread. As you saw from our psukim, our verses from the Torah, we are commanded to remove all chametz, and we are commanded to eat matzah. Matzah, therefore, because of that connection, must be made with ingredients that could also make something chametz. As it says in Pesachim in the Mishnah, these are the things with which one fulfills the obligation on Pesach: wheat, barley, spelt, rye, and oats. Now, I don't know about you, but I haven't had spelt in a very, very long time. It's one of those classic grains that humanity outgrew as soon as it realized it could grow things that were tastier. Rye still has its own following for certain types of bread. Oats are very popular even still. Barley, not bad. Most people only eat it in soup. Wheat, of course, is the king of grains, and it was the king back then as well. Wheat is both tastier for most of us. Wheat is also provides more calories for the amount of work you put into growing that area. So it was a much more, it came with a much better payoff for your investment if you were a farmer. So you need to have your matzah made from one of these 5 grains. If you wanted to make your matzah out of rice, if you wanted to make your matzah out of corn, it would not be kosher for Passover. It's got to be made from one of these 5. And you'll notice that these are, of course, the normal 5 that people would use for their regular bread week in, week out for the other 51 weeks of the year. What makes chametz is also what makes matzah. The only difference, of course, is how you turn the flour and water into matzah is going to be different than how you turn flour and water into chametz. Everybody with me? Rolling on. So as I said, these are the two kinds. In the Mechilta of Rabbi Yishmael, one of the earliest halachic midrashim, which takes the verses and shows us what we're doing, it tries to explain what this means. Exodus 12:19, for 7 days seor, which is the Hebrew word for leavening, that which causes the leavening, the puffing of the bread, shall not be found in your houses. This tells me, says the Midrash, that only that the transgression against finding it. Whence? How do I derive? From where do I derive the same for seeing it, for it even being in my possession at all? From the same section of Exodus from 13:7, and Seor shall not be seen unto you in all of your boundaries. This tells me that only Seor is subject to the injunctions against being seen and found. Where do we derive the same for chametz, right? Pause real quick here. Show of hands, how many people here are bakers? That's what I thought. No one bakes anymore. Well, not a no one. My daughter's getting to be quite a good baker. But most of you who have ever tried to make bread at all know that nowadays, if you want your bread to be fluffy, you add yeast and then you let it rise, right? Everyone's got that? Good. That was not an option for most of the ancient world. The ancient world didn't have those little jars of yeast or packets of yeast that you could just pour in and jumpstart the bread. Instead, what you would do is you would allow the dough to begin to ferment, and you would allow the dough to attract wild yeast. And yes, there is wild yeast out there that's just floating through the air. It would land, it would propagate, it would make the bubbles and make the bread fluffy. But you didn't want to have to do that every week, so you would leave behind part of that extra piece. In fact, this is what people still do with sourdough bread. They leave the starter from the previous batch, and they just keep using it in new batch after new batch after new batch, always reserving a little piece before they bake. That was the seor. That was the leavening wad of dough that you would just keep rolling for an entire year, and then at Pesach, you would get rid of it. But how do I know that I'm not only getting rid of my starter dough, but getting rid of anything made with it, anything that is chametz? Well, it says, chametz shall not be seen unto you, and seor shall not be seen unto you. Both of them are off limits. Seor is likened to chametz and chametz to seor. Just as the first, seor, is subject to both, meaning being seen or being in possession, so the second, just as the second is the 5 species, so the first, meaning chametz has to be made from the 5, and seor is made from the 5 as well. We're good? Good. So how does this actually happen then? Assuming you're not adding yeast. Well, leavening, I should say leavening, not leaving, excuse me. Leavening happens when water and flour are mixed and left for a time. Leavening was originally something that people could just tell by looking at the dough. You looked at it, you could see. But sometimes the dough didn't give off any signs that it had begun to leaven. If you've ever tried to bake bread, you know sometimes it's hard to tell when it's ready to go in the oven. The sages then gave a rule of thumb to help us avoid using dough that had leavened, without us noticing it. And this is from Pesachim in the Talmud. Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish said, this is the time it takes a person to walk from Mignal Nunaya to Tiberias, which is a meal, which is about 2,000 cubits, which is about 3,000 feet, so a little less than a modern mile. And that was considered to be rounded off by the rabbis to be about 18 minutes. So once the water and flour mix in your bowl, you have 18 minutes to get it in the oven. That's why making matzah can be a little bit of a frantic experience while you want to have everything set up before they touch, and then you can get it up and running. Make sense? Okay. There is a big question about what counts and what is prohibited for eating during Pesach. Because obviously if chametz is forbidden, then of course I can't have my wheat bread, I can't have my rye bread or things like that. I can't eat my Cheerios or anything like that, no cake, no cookies, all of those things that are made with regular flour. But what if it's made with an alternative flour? Well, this became a big issue in Ashkenaz in Europe, and it led to a prohibition called against kitniot. Kitniot is the term that's used for these legumes and associated foods that within the Ashkenazic world were prohibited. So let me just explain. Many people especially used bean flour to make their breads in addition to regular grain flour. This not only gave you a few more vitamins, but it also allowed you to stretch your flour further. So this was something that would be done. Now, if you've ever looked at modern flour, you're probably used to it being blindingly white. That's modern bleached flour. In the classic world, the flour still had all the bits with it. It was much darker, and it looked more like what bean flour looked like. And that meant that it was possible to make a mistake. As I point out on the page, remember, people made their own matzah. You did not go and pay $5,000 per box of shmura matzah for no good reason. If someone has a question about shmura matzah, I'll be happy to explain. Instead, people would make their own flour, just like they made their own, make their own bread, just like they made their own bread all the other weeks of the year. It was rare to have bakeries unless you had a certain size community. So that meant that throughout the holiday, they would be grabbing the bean flour or grabbing the wheat flour. And if they made a mistake, they would have made chametz. And so in the Ashkenazic world, they just said, no beans. You can still use the wheat flour, but now because there's no bean flour, I don't need to worry about you making a mistake or worry about some of the flour going in from the wheat going into the bean, getting mixed up, and then you've also made a mistake. It was just easier to stick with one that was at that lower limit of use of the 18 minutes. So in order to create a fence, the Ashkenazic authorities banned the use of beans and those similar foods throughout the holidays to avoid mistakes. The Sephardic Jews from the Spanish communities and the Middle Eastern communities and North Africa did not have this same practice or attitude. And in fact, even to this day, there are many modern authorities who do permit beans in their natural state. We can talk about this in more detail if someone has a question. Joseph, I see a hand up.
And where does rice fit in?
Where does rice fit in? So rice is also not considered, as you saw, one of the 5 grains. However, in the Ashkenazic world, no one will have rice during Pesach. In the Sephardic world, it started off that no one would use rice, but there was a time of great famine, and rice was what was available. And since rice is not prohibited according to the Torah for Pesach, the people began to use rice as a substitute. And that custom has carried forward, and most Sephardim will use rice during Pesach to this day. Any other questions on this? Onward. So now that we know what it is, now we've got to get rid of it, right? So there's one thing to say not to eat and not to have and not to make, but now how do we actually make sure we don't have any around? Well, on the evening of the 14th of Nisan of this month, they searched the house for chametz by the light of a lamp. Every place into which chametz is not brought does not require searching, right? Very important point the Mishnah is telling us there, which is if you have to prepare for your Passover, you need to walk around the house and make sure that your chametz is gone, but you do not need to go into parts of your house where you do not bring food, in particular chametz food. So this means you do not need to search your attic unless you take food into your attic. You do not need to search your basement unless you take food into your basement. You do not need to search the bathrooms unless you take food into your bathrooms. Wherever you bring chametz, you have to search for chametz. Wherever you don't, you don't. So if you want to make a rule that no one in your family can take food outside the kitchen, it's going to make your Passover cleaning much, much faster. But it'll also mean a little bit less cuddling up with a bag of cookies or chips on the sofa. Now, how much are you actually looking for? Well, again, according to the Mishnah, regarding the dough in the cracks of a trough, this was the section that people would use to knead the dough on. If there be as much as an olive's bulk, what we call a kazait, that means it's about that much of a block of dough, then you have to remove it. But if not, it becomes annulled because of its small bulk. If they're just tiny little specks and crumbs, you do not need to get out a magnifying glass and a toothpick in order to try and remove them. You are exempt from worrying about them. because they fall below the threshold of being substantial. Doesn't mean you should deliberately leave them. If you can see them and clean them, that's fine. But if you can't, you're also okay. We're going to go through a more general rule on cleaning, but I wanted to make sure you saw these two very important principles from the Mishnah before we get into the practical, how do we handle this in our modern homes? Everyone has the basics here down? All right, so from those two, as well as general rules of behavior, these are some general guidelines for how to clean. 1, all property and possessions must be cleaned and checked to make sure that they are free of chametz, except, and these are the exceptions, if during the year chametz is not brought into the place, that place does not have to be cleaned. We already talked about that. 3, if any article which is not used on Pesach does not need to be, any article not used on Pesach does not need to be checked for chametz, provided it is put away properly and chametz is sold. Take a look at your toaster sometime. No amount of cleaning is going to get rid of that chametz, which means you're not going to be using it on Pesach, and there's no point checking it either because you know there is chametz in there. So therefore, you put the toaster away, and the chametz that it contains is sold. We will come back to the sale of chametz a little bit later on. 4, crumbs which have been rendered completely inedible to the extent that they are not fit to be eaten by a dog, that's a technical term in Jewish law, are not considered chametz, meaning that if you have washed over them with bleach when you were scrubbing the floor, you don't need to worry about whether you actually found with your toothpick every last little piece, because any pieces that remain are now no longer edible. They do not count as food or chametz, and therefore they are nullified. 5, the general obligation is to check for and destroy crumbs. The general obligation to check for and destroy crumbs does not apply if the crumbs are less than the size of an olive, as we mentioned, and are dirty or spoiled enough to prevent a person from eating them. No one should be out there licking the bottom of their, underneath the refrigerator. And 6, the household cleaner that you use for doing your Passover preparation must spoil the crumbs slightly to the extent that people would not eat them, therefore. This means that you want to make sure that you're using an actual cleaner that is a little harsh. Just using a little bit of vinegar and some lemon juice in water is not really sufficient for Pesach. This is the time you want to crack open your bleach or other slightly harsher chemical cleaners. We good? All right, roll forward. So, before I get into the details of how to clean different things for Pesach, I want to make sure you have this warning. It is very, very common and very, very defended by many people that they want to do extra work for Pesach. They want to be what we call machmir. They want to be stringent. In generally being stringent with yourself is perfectly fine. It is often a way to give yourself an extra spiritual workout. However, there is a particular problem when it comes to Pesach, right? These stringencies often cause us to be relaxed or brush aside other mitzvahs during that time. So, for example, many people will work so hard getting ready for Pesach that they will not enjoy the Seder. And rejoicing during the Seudah, rejoicing during the meal is a mitzvah. And if you have bloody fingers from your scrubbing, and if your back is broken so that you can't even sit throughout the Seder, then you are actually ruining the mitzvah for the purpose of an unnecessary stringency. So you have to make sure that your cleaning should be done at the minimum and not really requiring additional spring cleaning. I have known people who will take out all of their linens on Pesach and they will air them outside and they will beat them with a brush and they will do all the other things. That's great after Pesach or during the middle of winter, which, by the way, when I lived in Japan, that's when people in Japan would do their cleaning. They would do it during the middle of winter, which is also in Florida a lot cooler if you're going to do the heavy duty cleaning. For Pesach, do Pesach cleaning. Don't do spring cleaning. If you want to do spring cleaning, move it to either side of the holiday so that you do not spoil that celebration. Everyone's with me? Okay, I'm seeing some nods. So let's move on to how we clean things in particular. I should point out that the general rules that are on this slide, these slides for cleaning for Pesach, also apply for generally koshering different surfaces and items for general use. So if you have things that you would like to make kosher as you move your kitchen to become kosher, or if you have something that was kosher that has somehow been cross-contaminated between meat and milk, then these are also the same steps that you would go through in order to re-kosher it, to make it kosher again. Floors. Yay! Nowadays, we do not live with earth floors. Very few people in the Jewish world are living in a hut that has a bare floor made out of dirt. Those floors, of course, would have cracks and crevices in them that you would have to search to see if there were pieces inside of them. Nowadays, make sure you have swept your floors or Swiffered them or whatever floor sweeping system you use. Wash the floor with a cleaner, and you do not need to get on your hands and knees to check all the cracks. Good. Food cabinets. If the cabinet is going to be used on Pesach, if you're going to still keep your food stored in there that you will be using on a daily basis, take all the food out of the cabinet, empty it, wash the cabinet with a rag soaked in our cleaner, and be sure that you go everywhere that there might be cracks that could soak into any crumbs that you have missed seeing. And then you can put your Passover kosher food back into the cabinet. Your refrigerator. Well, luckily a refrigerator is cold, and as we've talked about before, cold does not absorb. All we have to do is make sure that we have cleaned it out, take everything out, wash it with our rag with the cleaner. You can put everything back in, you're good to go. The refrigerator does not take too long, and really you should be giving your refrigerator a good clean at least once a year just for general hygiene. Sinks. Clean the sink out, then pour a kettle of boiling water into the sinks and on their sides, up along the edges. And nowadays, most of us also will use a special insert, a little rubber or plastic tub that will fit inside as an additional barrier. We're good so far? Good. Rolling on. Countertops. If they are used for hot chametz, that is to say, if you take your hot loaf of bread out of the oven and you put it naked on the counter, right? If you do something like that, then the counter should be cleaned very, very well. And then either boiling hot water should be poured onto them, the same way we did the sinks, or they should be completely covered so that nothing touches them. Now notice, if you do use the boiling hot water, you do not actually need to cover them. You will find that many people still have the custom of covering their counters during Pesach. I will confess, I do. But technically it is not required if you have used boiling hot water or if you never let food actually touch the surface of the counter. Tabletops. Wash them with a household cleaner and you are good. Again, many people will use a tablecloth for Pesach. It is not required as long as you have given it a good clean and made sure there's nothing still on it. Stovetops. Wash the top and side surface areas with a rag soaked in our cleaner. Old grates, for those of you with gas stoves or electric that have those grates, can be koshered by first cleaning them and then lighting all the burners and putting them on their maximum heat for 5 to 10 minutes. If you have the modern type of stoves that are perfectly smooth or glass topped, then all you have to do is clean them down completely, run the burners for a little while once the cleaner has been removed, and then you are good to go. Your oven. This takes a little bit more work. Wash out any edible chametz with a rag soaked in the cleaner. Depending upon how long it's been since you've cleaned your oven, this could require a little bit of extra scrubbing. There may still be pieces stuck on. Although technically those stuck on pieces would be spoiled by the cleaner, it is good to get off whatever you possibly can. I should also say that cleaning your oven at least once a year is, again, a very good habit for the life of your oven, as well as making sure that it is a generally nice thing to be working with. Then you heat the oven by turning it up to its highest setting for about an hour. If you have a self-cleaning oven, which many, many people do, that is good. If you do have the self-cleaning oven, make sure that you also, once it's cooled, give the whole inside a wipe down again to remove anything that has come off the sides of the oven during the hot cycle. Everyone looking forward to Pesach still? Pots, pans, dishes, cutlery, knives, forks, those kinds of things. Whatever is not going to be used for Pesach should be either locked up, sealed in a manner which will remind you not to use them on Pesach. Koshering of utensils for Pesach follows the general koshering rules covered in the previous class. You may remember we talked about taking our knives and forks and putting them into the boiling water in a pot. That's what you would do for anything you want to use for Pesach. Dish towels. Regular dish towels may be used if they are washed with detergent and there's no food still stuck to them. Tablecloths, again, wash them in a washing machine. You can iron them with your regular iron. It's all good. Everyone with me? All right. Now, this may sound a little complicated. This may even sound like hard work, but I'll point out that there is a blessing to this and an easy solution. The blessing to this is the reason why this is hard work is because we have a lot of stuff. We live at a time when most people own more things than kings would have owned in the ancient world. I have more knives and forks in my drawer than they had ever even heard of. So one of the reasons why this can be a lot of work is simply because of the blessings that we have. The easier solution, however, is to simply take the things that we use during the year, seal them off, and just have a set that you use for Pesach. We have 2 tubs that live in our garage that stay sealed up throughout the year, and they come out for Passover. We use them for a week, we load them back up, they go back in the garage, and they sleep there for another year. And that allows us to not have to re-kosher an awful lot. It does streamline the process considerably. And we've built up those boxes over the years that we've been together, my wife and I, and we've fine-tuned what exactly do we need, what don't we need, what would be useful to have, what's easier to just re-kosher. Any question on these general rules? Okay. Oh, there we are. You may have noticed I've mentioned a few times the selling of chametz, what's known as the mechirat chametz. So what in the world is happening? Well, as I mentioned, in the ancient world, people did not have a lot of stuff. Plates were often wooden slabs, or they were just hand-thrown pottery that was easily replaced. You just go down to the river, you get some more clay, you make some more. It was a little bit more complicated than that, but it was not the same as replacing the things that we have today. Everyone now has pots, plates, and other items that are too numerous to be koshered, or some are made of materials that cannot be physically koshered. This is especially true if you are somebody who keeps kashrut and has 2 sets of pots and pans, 2 sets of plates, 2 sets of knives and forks. Now you have double what was in the past. Which brings us to the question, do I throw them away? Why would I think I need to throw them away? Well, especially for our pottery, our earthenware dishes that are porous, the chametz that is in them cannot be removed. Our toaster, like I mentioned, the chametz in it cannot be removed. There are many other types of utensils and items that we have that is either near impossible or actually impossible to be made kosher for Passover. So if I cannot remove the chametz in it, I would need to physically remove it from my property if it was still my ownership. So we have an alternative. We take anything that cannot be used during Pesach that I'm either not going to kosher or cannot kosher, and I'm going to put it away, and I'll label it or seal it so it won't be mistakenly used. If you ever visit my house during Pesach, which unfortunately is not going to happen this year because of Corona, you'll see many strips of blue tape, masking tape, all over the kitchen of whole regions of cupboards that are out of bounds. Then we sell the chametz to a non-Jew, and we buy it back at the end of the holiday. I'll be sending out an email to help people with this process a little bit later, closer to Pesach, so that people will let me handle it, because I am what is considered a competent authority who knows how to take care of this process. I just want to again just reiterate, because some people still miss this. When you sell your chametz and you're putting away a pot, you're not selling the pot. you are selling the particles of chametz embedded in the pot that cannot be removed through the koshering process, or you're not removing through the koshering process. So when you sell the chametz, do not think you're selling your items. Think that you are selling the contents of the items that are crummy. We good? We're good. Bedikat chametz, you have done the work, you have prepared everything. It is now the 14th of Nisan. It is the night before Passover. So if the Seder is on one night, this is the night before the Seder. On the evening of the 14th of Nisan, they search their house for chametz by the light of a lamp, as we mentioned. Every place into which the chametz is not brought does not require searching. Again, you want to make sure that you are checking everywhere, that it actually matters. There is a bracha that we say for this, which goes as follows: Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kedishanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu al bi'ur chametz, which means that God has commanded us concerning the destruction of the chametz. Now, since we do not like to say a blessing and not achieve anything, we traditionally will reserve a few pieces of chametz. In my house, we have them wrapped in plastic wrap and then put into Ziploc bags, and we set them in different parts of the house so that we will successfully find something, having said a blessing for it. It's a lot of fun to see which one of the kids is able to find it. They usually spot it before I do. It's one of the things that we let my wife do, is she gets to hide the chametz. And then she always worries that she'll forget where she put it. Okay. As I said, we have, sorry, I forgot that we do this on, I already mentioned about the idea of using the pieces of chametz that's already set out, so our blessing is not wasted. You will also see many people have a custom of using a feather and wooden spoon during the search. This is not required. This is just a custom, a minor custom at best, that some communities have. The idea is sort of sweeping with the feather and using the spoon to collect. Doesn't actually work well, and as we already saw from the Mishnah, you're not required to sweep your house with a feather. Once we have actually gotten rid of it, then we do the legal declaration of bitul chametz. This is where we formally say that any chametz I didn't find ain't mine. So we sold the chametz that we knew about, we cleaned the chametz that we could, but anything that I've somehow overlooked, it's not mine anymore. Now, this is actually in Aramaic, and it was in Aramaic precisely so the people who said it would understand what the legal formula meant. The same way that Kol Nidre on Yom Kippur is written in Aramaic so people know what it means. So I'm going to read this to you in the English, because you should do it in the English unless you speak and understand Aramaic. Right? There is no benefit to doing this in the Aramaic unless you actually know the Aramaic. Legal formulas are not like some tefillot. We're doing them in Hebrew, has its own spiritual benefit. This, you need to know what you're saying. All chametz or leaven in my possession that I have not seen and have not destroyed and do not know of shall be nullified and become ownerless, like the dust of the earth. With that, you are now relinquishing any ownership over any chametz that you may have happened to overlook. And then biur chametz, this is where we actually destroy the chametz. Customarily, this was done by throwing any last bits of chametz into the fire. You can destroy it in other ways as well, including flushing it down the toilet if you don't happen to have a fireplace. Don't have it in the plastic bag if you're flushing it, by the way. That's not good for the plumbing. And again, we say in the Aramaic, all leaven and anything leaven that is in my possession, whether I have seen it or not, whether I have observed it or not, whether I have removed it or not, shall be considered nullified and ownerless as the dust of the earth. Everyone with me? So we do that on the morning of the day when we're going to have that Seder that evening. Ma'ot chitin, at this time of the year, it is also customary and really should be something that you take on as an obligation, that even as we do our own preparations, we also give to charity funds to make sure that all Jews are able to celebrate the holiday. In classical times, the wine in particular was often too expensive for many Jews to purchase. And so by giving donations, we made sure that everyone would be able to celebrate Pesach fully. This year, I hardly recommend giving to Jewish Family Services, the Perlman Food Pantry. They have had a huge upsurge in need during this shutdown because of the coronavirus. And so they are going through a lot of their stock and a lot of their resources very quickly. If you can give to them to help make sure that they will have enough to help everyone, it would be a very good idea and a very good way to begin your Pesach preparation. So once again, that's JFS, Jewish Family Services, and the Perlman Food Pantry that they run. All right, so in a usual year, what do we do to get ready for Pesach apart from all the cleaning stuff that we just talked about? Well, number one, we invite guests to the Seder. The Seder is always best celebrated with many people around the table sharing in the celebration. As I talked about last week, in the ancient world, when you had a sacrifice, usually the sacrifice of the lamb would be too much meat for any one person, and even usually for one family, and so multiple families would share in the sacrifice that had been done at the altar. We still want to have guests at our Seder. We also, in the weeks leading up to Passover, review the Haggadah and reread commentary. Again, check out Sefaria.org. They have the Haggadah online with many English commentaries as well. There are also many other great do-it-yourself Haggadah sites out there that can give you more insights on all the sections. Remember, what we went through last week was pretty much a sprint and didn't even begin to scratch the surface on what you can say about all the different parts of the Seder. Make sure that you're thinking up new questions. Make sure that you've found some new answers that you can then share with other people. Review the story of the Exodus itself. If it's been a while since you've read that section of the Torah, the beginning of the book of Exodus, go back and read it. The Seder itself does not go into great detail. Like I said, it is an expanded commentary on a particular passage rather than the entire story. Make sure that you go back and reread the story as well. Review Shir HaShirim, the Song of Songs. This song is considered to be associated with Pesach because it reminds us of the love between God and us. It was the love that God had for us that made God redeem us from Egypt. And being reminded, rereading the love letter, if you will, is a very good way. The same way that you might rewatch a wedding video or reread the old love letters when you are approaching an anniversary with someone. I don't know if people even write love letters anymore. Reread your old love texts. I don't know. Examine your own life for spiritual chametz. Many of the great sages will equate chametz as being the puffery that we give to ourselves, our arrogance, our snobbery, the other ways that we give ourselves airs. Go through, much as you might before Yom Kippur, and examine, how am I behaving? Am I allowing the air out of my ego? Am I allowing myself to be matzah for a little while? Am I giving myself that little bit of humility that is necessary? And examine your life for the ways that you are still enslaved to Egypt. Again, our sages for the last 3,000 years use Egypt continually as a metaphor, not only for slavery in a physical sense, although certainly there are many people who are both literally enslaved as well as figuratively enslaved to their work, but also Egypt is a symbol of idolatry. It's a symbol of being attached to the material world, a symbol of arrogance against God, as Pharaoh and the people had arrogance in the face of Moses's warning. All of those things are good and fitting for us to reflect on during this time. Except this time is a little different. This time we are facing a very severe health risk with the coronavirus, which means during COVID-19, this is how you should change your Passover preparations. Don't invite people to your Seder. Everything else is the same, right? Yes, it is maybe going to be a little more difficult to find some supplies. And if you're having trouble finding the mitzvah supplies, let me know. But in general, the major change that needs to be done for our Seder this year is to do it only with the people with whom you are sheltering in place. And those people become your Seder guests. If you have roommates that aren't Jewish, great. Give them a chance to learn a little bit about Judaism and share a nice meal with them. I'm sure they'll appreciate that. If you are alone, yes, it is not an enjoyable way to spend the Seder. I have been there when I was in Japan my first year. I did not have anyone to share my first Seder there with. And it is awkward and bizarre to read through the Haggadah. I do recommend, however, that you do the Haggadah out loud. Do not simply read it like a book or a pamphlet in your head. Read it as a retelling. Allow yourself to wonder, allow yourself to give your own answers. There is still a dialogue to be had and still an amazing experience. And that sense of isolation can also be something that allows you to reach out to God and to reach out to the eternal connection among all the Jewish people that has existed around the world and throughout all these years. And even the person who is alone is still part of that amazing tapestry of our people and our tradition. So if you really have to begin doing triage, we don't know exactly where things will be in another 2 weeks. Remember that the Pesach mitzvot revolve around matzah and maror. Those are your two key things. Bitter herbs should be easily acquired and should be easily kept for Pesach. Get a bit of romaine lettuce, you're good. Or some of the other more exotic things that I mentioned last week. Matzah could be harder to find. Right now it seems to be plentiful. But if no kosher for Pesach matzah is available, and do check, because some matzah is not made for Pesach. Some matzah is just flat bread. And you want to make sure that it is at least kosher for Pesach. If you still can't find even that, technically you can make it yourself. And I will be doing a video on how to do that and be releasing that next week. Also for the week of Pesach, even during the pandemic, we should still be able to avoid chametz in our food. If you're eating meat and vegetables and potatoes and just eating the basic staples of a food, for 1 week, you should be able to manage having that kind of supply. Now, if there is a lockdown that is causing food shipments to become much harder and there is not much to do, or maybe it is beginning to look like that might happen, you might stock up with a lot of things. Maybe you're buying extra rice or extra things that, I'm trying to think of other stuff you might be buying, extra pasta I know a lot of people are buying. And then you're saying, wait a minute, Passover's coming. I can't buy this because I'll have to get rid of it. This is where the mechirat chametz, the sale of chametz, is a great benefit to us. Buy it if you feel you need it. Store it during Pesach and sell it in order that it's not yours. And then after the holiday, if God forbid there is really a shortage of food deliveries because of the pandemic, you will still have it on stock. At no point in this particular time should you be wasting food at all. It should all be stored as long as it's storable. Any questions? All right. So that concludes our Passover preparation in general. If you have particular questions, please email me, text me, use the WhatsApp, whatever your favorite mode of communication is. But I'm going to be closing this Zoom and beginning the other Zoom with the other rabbis from the Orlando community in about 10 minutes. So I will hopefully see some or all of you there. Take care. Have a wonderful Pesach in 2 weeks, and I will see you next week for our next Pathway to Judaism class. But I'm going to warn you now, next week's Pathway to Judaism class is a Q&A, question and answer. That means you have to ask questions. If you are really shy about asking questions online on a recording in front of other human beings, text them, email me them, send them through chat, and I will be happy to read them out and give answers. If it is a question that you think is especially detailed, then go ahead and send that to me in advance and I can give you a more detailed answer. But the next week will be entirely up to you guys of what questions you have. It can be about Pesach, of course, or any topic that you would like to know more about. We all good? All right, stay safe, stay well, stay in touch with yourself, with me and with everyone else. All right, we're all going to get through this together. Bye.